Lloyd, where philosophy matters.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back. Good to see you. I'm excited today to be talking a little bit about some of my history with Voluntaryist and sharing some ideas about how you can avoid some of the mistakes I made when I was first developing the series and doing my fundraisers on Indiegogo and, kind of getting the momentum building for the series. So I'm going to be going over some of those things and sharing with you what you can do to have a best kind of effort and pitch for your own series if you're working on that or considering it for the future. So real quick, I'm going to just remind everybody here that if you're seeing this and you're not on the YouTube, definitely go to youtube.com/Jack Lloyd for the YouTube channel. That way I can see your comments best. And also subscribe there. That's where you can get your notifications when new videos go live. So hit that notification bell as well. So that way I can see you next time, just like I see Liberty Prime here right now hanging on out. So I'm going to be just going through that history here and sharing some of those screenshots of, or I should say images of things I had been working on and talking through the different mistakes I had made, starting this from basically nothing. I really didn't have any formal specific education in terms of comic book making. I was just someone who had some skills in the realm, had done a little bit in art school, but was not myself, really trained to do comic book art. I wasn't in any type of formal education for screenwriting or, writing comic books or doing novels or anything like that. So I was just someone who had an interest in it and decided to kind of teach themselves. And with that, of course, back in the day, there wasn't as much information about how to do that online. I had to actually learn a lot from scratch because when I started doing this, really in 2010 is when it started to kind of percolate and form about what I was trying to do, and eventually launched that in 2012. There wasn't as much information as there is today online about how to do all this. There's a lot more out there today, but it's still not as quite exhaustive, and I'm probably going to add some more educational videos about that in the future, but there really just isn't like a specific, I guess you could say, one-stop shop where it's like, oh, okay, you want to create your own comic book series? Well, here's what you could do to, fundraise and how to do messaging and how to hire artists and all this stuff. I had to do all that stuff from scratch, teach myself, learn from different resources. So the first thing I'm going to bring up here, I'm going to grab my screen here. So I'm going to be talking about the first mistake that I had made when I made my first issue, and that was having one artist do everything. So normally with comic books, you don't have one person doing all elements of the art, and that was something I didn't fully realize the importance of right off the bat. And it's not something that's readily apparent to anybody either if they're not familiar with all the nuances of the industry and people's different talents and abilities. But the idea that you have one person competently do pencils, inks, colors or color flatting, and then details, the lettering, and then formatting everything together, it is just very rare. And if someone can do all that, they're like basically an art god, essentially. If you're competent at all levels of that, you're one of the top artists in the world, really. You're absolutely, one of the best if you can competently do all those elements. So I didn't know that was something you really should make sure to have different people do. So when I first hired out, I had an artist who I was having do all the elements. Now the car wasn't too bad, but you could see the real, I guess you could say, not the best in terms of design elements on this page right here, where in this first issue, the way the text is done and the speech bubbles is not exactly the best. It says, I need to learn how to fight better, but it also is like, I need to have someone independently do the actual lettering. So, and it's it's sad to say that was something I didn't know at the time, that you really need to get someone independently who specializes in that to do it. But you live and you learn and you get better. So, and as Nathan Klein here says, specialization, and that's exactly right. You know, when it comes to anything in the market, specialization is key. You have people who are really homed in on a certain skill, and they hone that skill over time, and they become, you know, better than most at it. And so when it comes to doing the artwork, you really need specialists in every area. Some people can do maybe two things really well. So there's definitely more, it's more common that maybe you'll get someone who can do pencils and inks. Sometimes you get someone who can do pencils and colors, so, you know, that kind of thing. But the idea that you're going to do pencils, inks, colors, letters, and then all the formatting, and you're going to be great at all of it, again, it's super rare. So when you're doing your own comic book series, you definitely want to hire out in separate elements. Typically, in my experience and how I do things these days, I have a primary penciler, and then I have someone else who does the inks and colors. So someone who's competent at the inking and colors. So the inks is, you know, overlaying the pencil work with ink, usually digital, of course. And, you know, for me, it's always digital, but usually digital. And then after that, you know, you're going to have someone who's going to be doing the letters, you know, once you have your pencils, inks, colors down. And, you know, later on, I'll talk about that a little bit, about how, you know, I did my own lettering eventually, but it's just something to really take seriously. You don't want to be like, oh yeah, let me just try to save some money. Maybe I can find one person to do it all, kind of thing. You will more likely than not end up having a not as quality product in the end. You know, even though the overall design here wasn't too bad, considering that, you know, the same artist did, in this case, pencils, inks, colors, and letters. You know, the pencils, inks, colors are not too bad. You know, they're pretty competent for the medium and the style. The letters is where he fell short. So, you know, it's just something you don't want to risk. And it's not that bad either. Again, when you have specialization, you have people who are going to be able to maybe charge even a little bit more reasonably, because it's just what they do, and they're able to pump things out a little bit faster than someone who's not used to doing it all the time, right? You want someone who, because they're more competent, can even be more competitive, because it is something that they're able to do a bit faster. They have all their templates and their work stuff, and they're ready to go on it. So that's one of the first things that I learned in doing my own comic book series, to really avoid, you know, doing it in the future, was not having the same person do letters for everything else. So the second thing that, you know, was a big mistake that I made from the beginning, sadly, and I didn't realize the value of this until later, was not having at the onset character turns for every character. So when I first started doing the series, I just kind of jumped right into it thinking, oh, okay, well, I'll just have someone design everything ad hoc as we go, right? I'm just going to get someone to start doing pages, and from the pages, we'll develop the character and the continuity, which is a terrible idea. You know what I mean? Because you really want to make sure that when you have your designs, you have a character sheet where you can really see the character drawn from a bunch of different angles. And that way you have a fixed reference for the character going forward. If you don't have a fixed reference, then it's pretty easy to get lost and to have mistakes. And especially for yourself, right? Even if it's not always the artist, sometimes, you know, yourself, you might catch things when working with new and different people. So you really want to make sure that you do character turns of the major characters before moving forward. And at a bare minimum, even if you don't have a bust or something like that, you want to have at least the front, the back, the sides kind of thing, you know, maybe a turned angle. Because if you don't have something like that, again, then it's very difficult for you to catch when there's something off, right? Without the character being drawn out and detailed in a way that you can know for sure whether something is having continuity, then it's very easy to just miss a little detail here and there. And as you can see here too, with Voluntaryist, the character, I mean, I've had tons of issues over the years of just, you know, again, not that they made it to final production, but just people doing continuity of the design, you know, whether it's the arm strap being flat at the wrist, or how it bends across to the elbow and goes behind to the elbow, or the V shape on the back, or how the belt's designed. If you don't have those elements down solid, an artist can do little things like continue the belt too far, or have the striping in the wrong place, and you might not catch it. Your eyes might fill it in. You're looking at a bunch of stuff and you lose it. So, doing character turns of your major characters before you do your actual comic is so incredibly important. And I'm kind of impressed at how far I'd gotten without doing it. But it didn't come without cost. Like there was definitely mistakes. There was like in certain issues, there's little things off here and there. And that could have been avoided if I just had from day one, the character turns of the major characters, and I could myself reference those things and just be sure that I have the continuity down. And if I had done that sooner, I probably would have caught a whole lot more things going forward. And it's an unfortunate thing, but I did learn from the mistake, and I had, as you can see, I eventually got things made, and then it allowed me to catch things in the future and be able to do continuity checks much more readily and faster, and to show the artist too. That's the other part, is you want to be like, oh, hey, here, take a look at that arm or the elbow. This is what you're missing, or this is what's off, right? Even the same artist who created it can themselves sometimes have continuity mistakes. Sometimes they just forget, or they're working on other projects and they, whatever. So make sure to do your character turns before doing your comic, that is before doing the primary art, or you're going to have a real bad time. By and large, you're going to miss little details. You're going to make mistakes. Either your artist, is going to do something for a special thing. You're working with multiple artists and you have like a little promo art and it's different people, and then they make the mistake, whatever it is. So Blaze says, what's up? Do I have a Discord? I don't have a Discord yet. I've never made Discord, but I've used Discord here and there, but not a big Discord user or guy, but maybe I should. Who knows? All right. So the third mistake I made is one that is maybe not as obvious. This one was working with a third-party company. So some people, when they are first starting out doing their own comic book series work, they are scared, and rightfully so in some cases. It feels daunting to do it, all alone. And they're like, okay, well, maybe I'll just hire a comic book production company. Now, there are some good ones out there. It's true. There are some good ones out there that, you could actually reasonably rely on, and they'll probably be fine. But chances are, and this applies from what I've seen to most people, if you're doing Kickstarter or Indiegogo and you're trying to fundraise, there's a good chance you don't have the funds to afford the companies that can do things right. Just being real. You know what I mean? If you're like trying to hire, a third-party company, and you want them to be professional, timely, not jerk you around on different things, or try to, say, oh, like we need to push back the schedule, this or that, or, oh, could I have some extra money because of this or that? If you want actual good quality professional work, you're paying through the nose. That's just a fact. Now, maybe some people are able to do that. Maybe if you're loaded and you're like, I don't even need a fundraise if I really don't want to, you could afford to do that. You could be like, I'm going to go to a top tier, publishing company kind of thing. And, there are a couple of those, that exist. But for most people, they're not looking to spend $600 to $1,000 a page, right? If you're paying $600, $1,000 a page, that's what you could be expected to pay if you're saying, I'm going to a company that's top tier, right? Where it's like really professional. And that's, for most people, that's going to put them way out of affordability for making a comic. So the thing is that when you work with the lower tier companies, you run the risk of having some issues. And I had two different companies that I worked with over the course of time. In the beginning, I was doing things independently, then I switched to companies. So the two companies that I worked with, one ended up having an issue where they tried to say, oh, they couldn't deliver on contract time even after I gave them a 2-month extension. And then I had to like threaten legal action at that point. And they try to play it off like as if it's no big deal. I'm like, no, you were supposed to deliver. I was generous enough to give you 2 months extra. Now you got to deliver, or there's gonna be some problems. So they did deliver. They reprioritized my project because I had a really ironclad contract with them, where they'd be in big trouble if they didn't deliver when I said to. So they made some moves, but it did also, I think, hurt some of their other business relationships, because in reprioritizing mine, some of the ones that maybe they had looser terms of agreement, they kind of messed with in their delivery times. And that company went defunct. So their lack of, I guess you could say, professionalism, I think, led to a mass, you could say, annoyance with the company, and they went defunct. People didn't want to work with them anymore because they thought they can play around with delivery times with people who had hard delivery dates for people that are on Kickstarters and Indiego's. You just can't do that, right? You can't do that. So they went defunct. Then the second company I worked with was really weird. The company owner was trying to get me to pay more on the contract up front because they had some medical emergency thing. And I said no. I said if you make a GoFundMe or something like that, I'll chip in some money toward it. But it's unprofessional to ask for more of the contract payment before it's due because you think you have an emergency, when I'm supposed to be making sure I'm a good steward of the backer's money. I'm not just handing over the money. I got to make sure that this money is used appropriately. So that individual, did eventually deliver, but not without even some more stuff of trying to get like extra monies for like PayPal fees and other things. I said, hey, we already had a contract about this. What are you trying to get, nickel and dime for extra things that I'm like, our contract's solid. It's already set. You should have factored that in when you bid me on the price. So stuff like that. And again, that's more likely common when you're working with lower tier combo companies, people that are, not the high end, not the high level professionalism, bigger business. So, I got what I paid for there in a sense. They did do the stuff. I did get what I paid for ultimately, because I'm really good at making sure I have good contracts and that I have everything set and I'm very clear about my expectations. But it left a bad taste in my mouth about working with companies where they handle everything and you're essentially paying them extra to handle everything. And I thought that it's just ultimately not worth it. And the reason why is just that by and large, you're going to be wanting to have a better relationship anyway directly with your artists. And if you're the person who's directly dealing with the artists, then you can actually be the front line to making changes and you don't have to go through a middleman person, and you can really stay on top of what's going on, right? Instead of having to wait for the middleman and, this person sends to this person, it's just more streamlined for you to manage the artwork directly. So my, third piece of advice there again is working with a middleman, a middle company, by and large, just not a good idea. You're better off just working with the artist directly, unless you're just loaded, you got money to burn, and you're like, yeah, I can afford to pay the top tier company, whatever, $600, $1,000 a page kind of thing. 1,000 is a bit high, but more likely probably around 500-600, I would think, at least, for a high end company that will deliver, at least, mid-level comic book work. But it's just not gonna fly for most people. You're not gonna, you're not gonna be able to afford it. At that rate, right? You're thinking like a 24-page comic book. If you're paying a company $600 a page, right? I mean, that's already well over $12,000, and then 6, 12, 18, 24, right? So that's $14,400, not including cover, not including anything extra. That's too much for most anybody, doing an Indiego Kickstarter. I would say most people who are, again, if you're early on, you're in your first couple of options and you're just getting out there, will you raise $15,000? Probably not. Most people in their first Indiego Kickstarter are raising under 10,000, which is enough to definitely make your first comic and get people interested because, you're just doing it to friends and early adopters, that kind of thing. But it's not realistic for most people to raise that level of money that you are going to be able to afford a top tier actual, comic company that does this type of artwork for hire. So again, work with artists directly. You save a little headache, you save a little miscommunication, and you're able to make those corrections much faster if there's any problems because you're directly communicating with the artist. So definitely something to consider. The third thing, or the fourth thing that I wish I had done a little bit differently is making the perks that I was, doing originally, things that are relatively easy to ship and are not that costly. So, for example, and this one's not like the worst of it, but I did have sublimination dye T-shirts, and I had other things too that were a little bit tougher to ship. So when you're first doing your comic project, it's tempting to want to be like, oh my gosh, I want to have all the cool stuff. I want to have all the merch. I want to have mugs. I want to have figures. I want to have whatever, right? But it's it's not realistic to be able to do that both well and affordably. You're going to blow most of your budget on these things and on shipping. Really what you should do for most people, again, this is just more typical, is just look to do items that are easy and affordable to ship, lightweight, stuff that will fit with a comic. So we're talking about smaller art prints, under letter size. It could be a patch even that's at least that's a little bit smaller, could fit in there. Stickers, that kind of stuff. Game cards, even anything that can just readily fit into a flat mailer that's not expensive to ship. Because if you do more expensive things, again, there's nothing wrong with wanting that or getting to a point where you can reasonably afford to do it. But if you start off with that, you're going to be spending a lot of your fundraising budget on those things. You're not going to be raising as much to actually fund your comic. And there are cool things to have with it. I mean, definitely. It's not like there isn't something inspiring to have. Like, for example, I have this Voluntaryist action figure. It was super cool. It's got 16 points of articulation, right? I mean, it's a super cool prototype thing. But was it worth having made for $1,000? Like, it cost $1,000 to get 2 of these, and one of them went to a backer on the campaign. So, on one hand, yeah, this is super cool to have. It's great to be able to like prototype a figure, and you can definitely do that off Alibaba or something like that, or even have someone do it 3D printed style, which I've done those too. But okay, great. Now out of like the support, I've just spent, $500 for one perk. Well, that just cut up a huge portion of, your budget. You know what I mean? It's like you're not going to be able to, have that money go toward the actual comic book creation. Again, super cool. And there is a time and place to do this, but is it at the beginning or toward the beginning before you've really gotten your main story out there and have developed the characters and the character turns, everything? No, it's not a good idea. You know what I mean? You're spending your resources on the wrong things. You really need to be spending your resources on the character turns and the actual interior pages and getting your story told and done right so everything looks good, and not on the extras. Again, the extras are cool at the point where you've actually developed the story and you have the characters drawn well and everything's consistent and people are into the universe. But doing that too early means you're spending a lot of money on those designs instead. You're spending, money on the shipment in ways that's, way more expensive, and you're taking away from your growth opportunity. You're taking away from actually growing the story that hooks people, that gets people want to continue to go along with you. Something like this is something to have after you have your like main origins arc done, right? If you do this kind of thing, do it after you've already established the character and kind of that background story and have gotten people hooked, and you kind of have a little bit of a fan base going that actually would want to support, what you have going forward on a more continual basis. Because otherwise, again, you're just spending money on not telling the story, and it's just on the theoretical future. It's not on the actuality of getting people hooked into what this character is about and getting them excited and wanting to, be a part of the next issue. So, again, there's lots of fun things you can do. I can even show right here another one of those things. It's a little embarrassing but funny at the same time. So, I did like Zentai costumes too, right? So I had an artist who they specifically do Zentai costumes. That's those kind of lycra, like kind of spandexy suits. It was fun. I did sell a few of those, real like big time supporters did get them. They're more expensive to do. They're harder to ship. They were fun. And it's good stuff. It's fun for cosplay. Like if you just want it for your own cosplay fun for promo, you can do that too. But again, when you're spending hundreds of dollars on this right off the bat, instead of developing your story, you're missing out, and you're really, hurting your ability to actually get the story out there and get the growth going on in a way that is going to get people hooked for the future, where they would be willing to be like, oh yes, I really want to get these bigger perks, right? Otherwise you're not actually telling the story, and people are like, okay, that's great. You have a nice figure and a shirt. Okay. But I don't know anything, much about the character. You only have 10 pages or 20 pages because you spent all your budget, on the physical perks and not on actually writing the story. So the next thing that I did that I'm, there's some pros and cons to it, but I at the end of the day, I am kind of more on the con side of it. And that is that in the beginning, I had started doing some Futureverse prototypes. So it's tempting to want to like model and mock up different things that can be happening with the future. And there's nothing wrong with that in terms of saying, oh, I would love to see what it's like if we were like 20 issues out or whatever. But you have to avoid the temptation when it's in lieu of actually telling your story, right? You have to avoid the temptation to do that when it's in lieu of actually getting out there the core elements of what it is you want to do. Now, again, were these some fun issues like the Voluntaryist versus State of Zombies? Yes, it was fun to do. And it definitely brought in some interest for the series, but it wasn't telling the origin story. It wasn't actually getting readers to the point of being able to connect with the core elements of it. So while these are fun and they were gimmicky and, insider humor and stuff like that, and, and they was prototyping some potentials for the future, ultimately it was kind of a deviation from what I should have been doing. And what I should have been doing is I should have been working on the core origin story and having that chronology move forward. And that's what you should be thinking about with anything that you're working on when you're trying to get your story out there. Is you should be like, okay, is what I'm working on, is this actually getting readers the core story and getting them to be like, okay, I want to know what happens next. What's the mystery unfolding? What's actually, going on? Is it getting them there, or is it just teasing and it's incomplete, right? It's like, okay, that's a nice tease, but that's incomplete. So again, it was fun to do these issues where it's like, shielding Assange with the Voluntaryist and stuff like that. And the artwork was okay. I mean, the colors was probably the best part, but it wasn't really something that was meant to be canon. And I think that in trying to do these Futureverse things to try to inspire people, I was taking away from the opportunity to just get people hooked on the story. So that is something that I really recommend more than ever, which is that it's easy to get lost in the field of all the possibilities of the things you can do. All the different types, again, the perks and the merch and the, what is Futureverse stuff, but don't do it. It's cool, and there might be a place for it down the road, but when you're first starting, you should be focused on telling the story. You should be focused on keeping it simple with the perks that's affordable, and you should be spending the resources that you get on the story development. And that way people are hooked in the story and they want to know what happens next. And then once you start to build up that fan base and that audience from it, then you can start to bring in the more expensive things because the people actually are interested in those things now that they're connected with the character, now that they're interested in what's actually going on with the universe, instead of wondering, okay, when are you going to actually like have a chronology that's continuous and okay, I can follow this along. So it's something that is easy to fall into. It's a trap that I think a lot of people fall into, but it's not something that is going to be beneficial long-term to your comic book production. In the end, you're going to end up looking back and regretting what you did because you're like, I spent too much of my resources on, the mugs or like trying to make a figure, trying to make, this t-shirt or whatever, and try to like prototype a Futureverse. And, you're going to be like, I should have just stayed with the story and then built up slowly with everything else. So don't make my mistake of doing that. Again, were there some benefits to it? Sure. It was fun to do it. And some people liked the insider humor content. And some people, did find it interesting. But as compared to what could be done with actually writing the story and developing it, in a continuous chronological manner, it pales in comparison, right? So if you're, again, if you are going to do just a one-off thing, like let's just say you're not trying to create a story that's supposed to be continuous, like you're doing like a parody issue, like that joke, like the My Hero MAGA whatever thing, I forgot who made it, but it's basically someone did this like Walmart parody. Someone could probably tell me what the name of it was. I forgot what it's called. It's like it was a My Hero parody with Trump, and it's like a one-off joke. Okay, well, yeah, if that's your whole thing, is you're doing it like a one-off parody joke, fine. Okay, you can do your Futureverse joke kind of thing. But if you're like, no, I'm trying to build an actual continuing universe, an expanding universe, then no, you don't want to be making what the one-off parody thing and or future verse that doesn't actually tell the story. We're going to keep it going and keep people hooked. So yeah, it's something to really not get lost in. It's just very easy to get lost in the weeds of all the creative possibilities and things you can do. Yeah, as Liberty Privacy here says, Voluntaryist video game, right? I even did prototype a video game at one point, just a simple, video game with Voluntaryist, kind of like, you could say one of those like alien space shooters things with Voluntaryist where he's like shooting energy at like TSA agents. It was really funny. I did it in Stencil. But again, that's one of those things. You're like, ooh, what else can I do? What else can I do? And you're like losing sight of the fact that you're not actually developing your story. So I definitely I lost sight several times while developing Voluntaryist, just trying to be like, I can do everything. I can show you that we can make all kinds of merch here. See, look. No, it only hurts your progress on moving forward and being able to tell your story and get people hooked on that. You know what I mean? Because that's what people want is the readers, right? If you're a reader and you're like, okay, I want to know what happens next, and the author's like, yeah, but I want to make mugs, you're gonna be like, wow, you're gonna be upset. You're gonna be like, why did I do this? Right? You're gonna be frustrated at yourself because people want to hear the story. Again, the mugs are nice after you've developed the story long enough that someone's like, oh, okay, I'm a fan now. I would love to have the mug or whatever. I'd love to have the shirt. I'd love to have the action figure. Yeah, great. There's a time and place for that. I think, even Ethan Van Sciver did that well, right? He didn't start off like, here, I'm going to do action figures right off the bat. He started with the comic, and then he worked his way up. After that was successful, he worked his way up to the figures and stuff like that, which makes sense, right? You want to have the success in the story writing, and that breeds the rest of what it is you're able to do. Because when you're a creative, it's true. It's very easy to get lost in the possibilities that I can do all these different things. I could, and you want to be like, yeah, I'm like the big guys, like the big independents. I can do it like them. And it's like, sure, maybe you can, maybe you know how to get these things done, but you're losing out. So, Super Galactic Fantastic Dimension. Good plug here. Actually, I do have that comic. It's in the other room, but it's a really cool superhero genre novel. I definitely recommend. So. Says here, large companies focus on budget/deadlines, which means they're not always getting what you want. Working with the artist allows for more exploration and creativity if you have a good rapport with the artist. Exactly. Right. I completely agree. Large companies that are good, again, the good part is the predicate, not just any company, but they're actually are delivering quality artwork on time. They may not necessarily even give you what exactly you want, due to their own constraints potentially of the back and forth and the time, right? So even if they can make some good artwork, are they doing it in the outcome necessarily that you want, right? They're competent in the art, but did they reach the end that you wanted in terms of here's how I want this character posed or this or that? If you work with the artist directly, you save some time there, and it's a little bit more convenient to like talk with the artist directly and get them to adjust little things to make it more like what you want than to be like, okay, I got to go talk to the company again. Oh, this is off. This is off. This is off. Okay, now you're having an email chain back and forth. You're spending all this time, and the companies are like, I don't like that. We're going to, whatever, charge you more. Whereas if you work with the artist and it's just directly and informal, right? Now there's no longer that intermediary charging time. There's not that middleman who's like, oh, well, I'm working, so I need to get paid. Whereas it's like you and the artist, it's like, okay, it's just a casual conversation. It's a little bit easier to directly deal with making those updates or quick changes, especially you're doing the drafts and the pencils. So, and again, if you, as he says here, yeah, like, I don't know if your Dave said it's okay, but basically Super Galactic Fantastic Dimension, he's saying here that if you have good rapport with the artist, you're going to have a much better time, right? And a big part of having good rapport with the artist is always going to be clear communication, clear work product or mock-ups, like whatever you can do to describe it as best as possible. Obviously paying on time, being true to your word, that kind of thing, being efficient, those things are going to make it so that you have good rapport with your artist. So absolutely. All right. So let's see here. Okay. I'm looking at my sheet here. I got a little sheet just reminding myself of what to, of these points. So the last part is not doing my own lettering sooner. So when it comes to, the artwork, when you're, thinking about what it is you're going to contribute to or contribute with, I would say by and large, most people who are thinking about making their own comic book series are not primary artists. yes, there are lots of artists out there who do make their own series, and they do it by hand, but are able to at least do some form of the basics, the fundamentals with pencils, or just at least some mock-ups, even if they're rough. Just I think like One Punch Man, right? That person who made that series, the original One Punch Man artwork was actually pretty crummy. He didn't care though. He's just like, it's about the story. So it was the artwork was like really bad. But he didn't care. It's like the story is what matters. And then eventually he found a really talented artist to pick that up and then do One Punch Man really well. So from my experience, most people who are looking to create their own story are not the primary artists. They're people who are the writers, right? That's more often the case. It's pretty rare that someone's just hiring someone to write. If, you know what I mean? If you're just doing it on your own, like the idea of hiring a writer is more like a business corporate thing than, an individual who's just a creator. It's, usually it's like big companies that are like, yeah, we're looking for a writer. So you're mostly seeing people who are writing the story, right? The person who's a creative, they came up with the characters, the powers, the story arc, the mission, the vision, and that kind of thing. Which means that typically those people, myself included here, are not the primary pencilers, inkers, colorists, that kind of thing, or letterers. So the question then is to what extent can you do anything with your comic series yourself in terms of editing and design? And I would say the most common skill, the thing that people can usually do and pick up, no matter who you are, is lettering. Lettering is not necessarily purely easy. It's not like completely easy, but it is something that doesn't require a lot of crazily, honed craft with drawing proportions, right? Because it's a little bit more like graphic design, you can pretty much do lettering yourself, picking up the basics of Photoshop. You could take just like a basic Photoshop course online, cheap if you've never used it before. And you really should, honestly, if you're going to be doing artwork of this kind, because chances are you're going to need to make adjustments or suggestions. And if you know how to use Photoshop, at least on a somewhat basic to intermediate level, just the basic tools, putting down words, arrows, things like that, you're going to be able to actually communicate with the artist much more clearly and show what needs to be changed, or maybe change the color on something by just shifting a color slider, stuff like that. So if you want to do your own series and do it affordably, I highly recommend picking up lettering. And lettering is something that you can learn, in a week, pretty much. Just watching a few videos on the basics of Photoshop. There's actually a book that is pretty good too, and I'll share a link to that later. I'm gonna pull it on up. I'm also gonna pull up here a website that can help you out greatly. So there it is. So blambot.com. So the Blambot website has a whole guide on how to be a good letterer. It's got a bunch of different ways that you can learn how to do comic book grammar and tradition in terms of design. I take some of these points myself and kind of learn from them and then adapt them to my own style. But it's pretty straightforward. It's nothing too hard to pick up. It's something you can definitely spend a week, or if you're very busy, working a job and doing other stuff, you can pick it up over a couple weeks, just looking at it over a couple weekends and practicing. So if you, do that, if you take a look at blambot.com, look through their lettering basics, their comic script basics and stuff like that, you can pretty much pick up how to make a comic book and do some lettering stuff yourself. Now they do have some, differences from what I like to do. Like, for example, in their comic script basics, they have something that's like very formal, where someone's like, here's what you need to have for every single panel, and here's what you need to do, for narration stuff. I don't do that. I do more open-ended things because I like my artists to be able to use their creativity to figure out what is the best layout. Like based on their creative inspiration. I just stick to, here's what the scene is, here's the description of the characters, and here's the dialogue. And I let them figure it out. But again, if you want to do more, hey, I need to have every panel laid out, they give some templates there too. And then they even have a guide there called the Essential Guide to Comic Book Lettering. So the Essential Guide to Comic Book Lettering is something that I'll post a link to later. It's basically a book that gives you how you can letter comic books and do it effectively. and it goes through everything. So it's a book you can pick up and read through if you're totally fresh to this. Like, this is definitely the book you want to get if you're like, I've never done this before, I really want to learn it, nuts and bolts. This is the book to get. It will teach you what you need to know about lettering through and through. I already had some experience with Photoshop, so I didn't come to this totally raw. I didn't come to this like not knowing anything whatsoever. Obviously, I know comics generally from just being a comic book fan. So I had a little bit of advantage. But even there, I still read this book and I found some useful tips and tricks from it. It is based on an Illustrator-oriented workflow, so it's using the Illustrator program. I don't use Illustrator. I use Photoshop, but you can adapt it for either or. It's not something you couldn't do. So that is probably the most useful piece of advice that I would have given myself going back. I genuinely wish I had picked up lettering from the beginning. I should have just done the letters. I should have read and learned myself. Now, Blambot didn't have that book out yet with Nate's book, but it was in existence and there was enough information to know the basics. Like, you could, it's not like, oh, I couldn't have found the basics watching some YouTube videos or something like that. So that is my biggest regret. I should have picked up lettering earlier. I would have saved money on hiring a letterer. I would have had another level of checks as I go through everything, because again, when you're proofing your script, you want to make sure everything's spelled right. And also, if you're your own letterer and you're going through it, you're like, oh, actually, I don't like how I wrote this, I want to change it. Well, now you don't have to go through a third party or intermediary, stuff like that, to get it changed. Now it doesn't matter when you want to do it. If you're reading it like, oh, I want to change that. Okay, boom, you just go and change it yourself, right? Now you're going like, oh, okay, I'm going to go in and change that dialogue a little bit, or I'm going to adjust what's stated, or I'm going to adjust how it's presented. So lettering to me is pretty much the thing to do. Like, it's the skill that probably most people can pick up because it's more formulaic in a lot of ways. You can be artistic with it. You definitely can be more artsy, but you don't have to. You can choose to be like, I'm just going to go with like the most traditional formulaic way of doing it and do fine. You could, go with just the most traditional standard way of lettering and just follow the templates and follow the guide to a T. That's up to you. You know what I mean? It's something that you have to play around with and see what works best for your style, for what you're making. But it's something that if you do pick that up, you're going to really save yourself some headaches, because it's just a skill that you really can use across the board. It's something that's going to let you be able to communicate, with your artists. It's going to allow you to make adjustments really quick. It's going to allow you to save some money on lettering. It's going to allow you to adapt to new ideas and new inspirations as you go along with how things are framed or said. So that's probably the number one thing I would say overall, is that if you pick up lettering, you're going to save yourself a ton of time, resources, and headaches. And it's not that bad. You know what I mean? It's not like, oh my gosh, I have to draw this from scratch, I have to color this from scratch. No, it's just lettering. You know what I mean? You already wrote the script, right? If you're the writer, you already wrote it. You're just copying and pasting, and then you're just, setting the font style to what you want. And you got Blambot. Again, Blambot you have as a complete guide and resource for both fonts. And they have a bunch of free fonts here too. If you want fonts that are free for independent or indie comic use, they have tons of those. They have services, they have guides. There's no lack of any knowledge here. If you go on Blambot, you can definitely pick up at least the basics, the traditional format of lettering like that. No problem. You'll be onto it and doing it in a few weeks. So it's just something that you really should consider getting ahead of if you're considering making your comic soon, or are planning out a script and are thinking about maybe next year, getting on that. You definitely should pick up the basics of Photoshop and the basics of lettering, and you're going to really set yourself up for success, because it's going to let you be able to work with your artist and to communicate things directly on the work they're doing, or to make adjustments and stuff like that. So Saucier says, I think this is the first time here. Are you comicsgate? Yes, I'm definitely in the comicsgate realm. In fact, probably one of the earliest, because I did Voluntaryist, or I launched it in 2012. So my stuff was pushing back against the mainstream stuff way before it became a really big thing. So, and Patrick said, is there a secret to find a good collaborative artist locally? So with me and how I do my artist, I guess you could say, procurement, there's a few ways that you can go about it. So if you're trying to find someone locally, you could, but it's not really advisable necessarily, because if you're doing that, you're limiting the options for your talent. So you're pretty much limiting all the possibilities of style, because you're not going to probably find like, unless you live in a big city where it's like there's tons of people, you're probably not going to find the diversity of talents you need to like kind of choose and select which style might be best. And then your costs might be a bit higher, especially if you're in America. So, because if you're really just starting out, a lot of times the best thing to do is to hire international. You want to hire from people who are in lower costed areas, which is why a lot of international artists, there's big hubs, are going to be in places where they're much more affordable, because it's just cost of living there is so much different and cheaper. So a lot of those artists are coming out of Indonesia, the Philippines, Brazil, Argentina, and stuff like that. You're going to be either in South American or East Asian countries where the cost of living is significantly lower, and there's much more affordable rates, but they're very competent artists. So, and for them too, again, it's not like, oh, they're like making nothing. No, it's like the artists live like kings there. It's like, because, for what they make much more than the average person does over in their country. If they came to America, it'd be like, okay, that's not as much money, but over in their native country, it's like, yeah, being an artist is like, yeah, I'm doing good. So doing international is much more common to do, especially when you're just starting out. If you do a high-end American artist, your costs are going to be double, triple, maybe even quadruple. So the lettering, process and stuff like that, that again, you can hire out for that. And there's tons of people who do it, even affordably, even in the US, because it is relatively a more accessible skill. But lettering by hand these days is almost non-existent. You always letter with digital, because lettering by hand sounds, absolutely miserable and insane, because, just having to fix and adjust things, when you could just have a computer and click a button and boom, you just adjust it. It doesn't make much sense. So yeah, you definitely want to explore the opportunities of different people from around the world and see, who's got a good portfolio. I could go more into detail on this on another video, like in terms of like what to think about and what to look at when you're hiring artists. But for a lot of people, their first foray into looking at talent might typically come from being on DeviantArt. So on DeviantArt, there's a jobs boards forum, and it's pretty easy to like post your project and your needs there, and to like get a bunch of different offers and people, and then to actually see what they offer, because you can see their accounts, you can see their portfolio there. You can see if they have any other websites or any other demonstrations of their work out elsewhere. It's pretty easy to check out credibility and opportunities there. So yeah. So hopefully this helps you think through your own creative process and projects. Again, the things that just going through the list again for everybody to hear, the things that I wish I'd done a little bit differently are that I wish I didn't have one artist do it all. I wish I, broke it up so I had specialization. I wish I did the character turns of the characters early on. So again, I wish I had actually, instead of just going right into the comic book production process, I wish I had done more of the turns. I didn't wish that I worked with the middleman. That is a creative agency. I wish I had just worked with the artist directly and continued to do that. I did it from the beginning, but then I shifted away, and that was a mistake. I should have just continued to work with artists directly to save time and resources, because it just doesn't make much sense to work with a middle person unless you're just loaded and it doesn't matter. And you're like, yeah, I got the money to throw at this and I don't want to deal with it. So I'm going to, pay a crazy amount of money to a big company, whatever. The fourth, making perks that are too costly and too costly to ship. So again, when you're starting out, don't be trying to make action figures. Don't be trying to make mugs and shirts, all this other stuff that you're going to spend so much of your budget on making it and shipping it. Stick to the stuff that's affordable, pictures, art prints that can fit inside, of your comic mailer, stickers, that kind of stuff. Again, cool things that people like, but stuff that's not going to be like, oh my gosh, I just blew half my budget on shipping and, and making these perks custom, having an artist custom make, something. Down the road, sure, it makes sense. Absolutely. When you're trying to actually, develop beyond just a comic book and make merch and stuff after you have a fandom and stuff like that. But not off the bat, and definitely not within the first couple of issues or whenever you finish your first kind of arc. You want to get through your first major arc concept, like a major, narrative, before moving on to bigger things. Because then people are hooked on the narrative, and you've shown that you can do this right and do it well. And now it's like, okay, and now I'm ready to add on cooler things, whatever that may be. Maybe, trying out action figures or other more difficult merch items. And you get, ramped up too in the shipping process and learning about how that works. So. Not sticking to the chronology right away. Number 5 again. So making sure you're telling your story. Don't waste your time trying to do future verse or do one-off teaser weird stuff. Just focus on telling the story. Get your story in there. Get people to get hooked on it and to have the mystery unveiling and to have people like, okay, what happens next? Don't try to be like, oh, here's what happens in issue 50. Here's what happens theoretically, 10 years from now. You're just spinning the wheels and wasting time when you should be telling the story as it's meant to be, and to continue, with that. You want to have the series be continual right off the bat, so that people are like, yes, I want to know what happens next issue, next issue, and so on and so forth. And then lastly, of course, again, the lettering. Pick up lettering if you can. I mean, if you absolutely can't, whatever, there's letters out there, and it's not the most expensive part, to do. But if you are able to pick up lettering and teach yourself the basics, you've got 2 birds, 1 stone. You have the ability to do the letters yourself and to make adjustments right off the bat, ad hoc. You're good to go. Or number 2, you're able to actually get the sorry, just lose my train of thought here because there's some spammer. So you're able to actually get what you need to communicate to the artist more effectively. You're able to, because you're able to use Photoshop, at some basic to intermediate level. If there's anything issue-wise with the art, or you want to just more quickly show them what detail you want to change, well, now you're in Photoshop. Okay, boom, boom, boom. Here's an arrow. Here's some text. Hey, artist, could you adjust this on their face? Could you adjust this in the background? You can point to it, put a picture in, describe whatever. It's on there. It makes communication way better, much faster. So yeah, and okay, and then Sauce says, is there a quick and easy packaging website that has all issues? No, there's no package on there, because the comics that I have, and I can show real quick, just so people know, the comics here that I have on the website, they're all done through Indie Planet. So it's a third party that does all of the printing and shipping, which that is advisable. You don't want to be the person, I gotta tell you, that's another. There could be number 7. I didn't have them there, but that's another one. I never did this because I was never going to do it in the first place. But don't think that you should be like, yeah, I'm going to like print and ship all my stuff myself going into the future, at least right off the bat. Again, in the future, yes. And some people even say, well, you'll save so much money and this or that. It's like, no, dude, like if you were just still living your life and you're building this, ramping this up, you want a third party company that is going to handle, all of your printing and your fulfillment and stuff like that. You want someone that has the expertise and has the equipment, the facilities, and the shipping deals that they can print on demand and they can take care of it. And then you're not there like, oh my gosh, I got to ship something every day, or like, oh, here's what's coming into this or that. You want to have someone that takes care of that for you. And Indie Planet Kablam, to me, they do that the best. It's just hard to beat what they have over there going on, because basically they take care of everything that you could possibly want in terms of hosting and in terms of printing on demand and in terms of, getting stuff shipped out nicely. They're the pros, and they're going to make your life so much easier to have everything, listed there and ready to ship. And then you're not being bothered with it. You get your, royalty out of it, for each comic sold, but you're not there having to micromanage all these different shipments. And then it's really inconvenient. What if you're traveling? What if you're doing this or that? You don't have to worry about it. You want to make sure that someone else is taking care of it for you. They have a full-time staff. They're handling customer service. They're handling tracking and sending people the tracking updates. You're just free and clear to stay focused on production and creating. And again, if you ramp up to the point where you have the resources, it's like, oh, it makes sense. We have a full-time facility like Eric July did. I mean, that makes sense, right? When you're selling at that scale. When you're just starting out and you're not at that scale yet, oh, no, it doesn't make sense. But if you get to the point where it's like, oh my gosh, I'm having thousands and thousands of buyers and it's on a recurring basis. Okay, well, yeah, maybe now it makes sense to get a staff in a warehouse and you do your own mass purchase and your own mass fulfillment. But even then, it depends on your risk. It depends on your time commitments and what you really want to do. How much of your time you want spent, doing those types of just daily chores, rather than, oh, okay, I'm just focused on making the campaigns. I'm focused on making the story. I'm focused on working with the artists and getting stuff done. That's what I want to be doing with my time. As much as I do enjoy the fulfillment after a campaign, I'm like, it feels great to send people personal notes and to fulfill it. If that was to the point of like, oh my gosh, this is all the time. Yeah, no, I don't really want to be like, okay, I'm the one who has to like sit here and fulfill all these packages every day and ship them out manually, and stuff like that, as opposed to, okay, actually my time is spent working on the comic script, working on the actual artwork being formatted, making sure everything's good. That's what I'd want to be focused on is on the creative side. I think that probably applies to most people who are actually the writers, producers wanting to make this happen. You're not wanting to like be bogged down in the day-to-day grind of fulfillment. So, all right. Well, I appreciate everybody here hanging out. It was really great to see everyone. Thanks, Patrick. Thanks, Sauce. Thanks, C4C. Big special thank you to Super Galactic Fantastic Dimension. Jeremy there, really appreciate that. Super chat, that's awesome. And definitely check out his series 2, the Super Galactic Fantastic Dimension. I'm actually going to be promoting it when they have a launch of their next issue. So I have their original one. And actually, maybe I should do a review of that too at some point, going through the basics of that comic book. It's like, it's really like a graphic novel and how thick it is. But, it's a comic. So definitely something to check out. Good to see Nathan. Good to see LP. Good to see Gary. So, good to see Mohammed and Blaze and everybody. So, thank you so much for hanging on out. And we're gonna just keep on having fun watching this culture change. It's always fun every day to continue to see the indies start to win and to start to get people to gravitate away from the mainstream woke SJW nonsense and to be like, okay, I'm ready for some meat. I'm ready for some real action and adventure and character development and intriguing plots that really make you think. I definitely crave that. And even back then in 2012, when I finally launched Voluntaryist, I'm like, I'm tired of this stuff in the mainstream. It's like they all just, hate liberty and they hate, individual freedom, and everything's always about, we need to have eco-fascism and, government good. So, all right. Take care, everybody, and I'll see you later.
Zero State with Jack Lloyd.